We've been talking about taking steps forward in our faith. We've followed the children of Israel as they journeyed from slavery in Egypt to the Promised Land. And we began this series by talking about how God met them where they were and then invited them to take one step forward by giving them the Ten Commandments. It was the first stop on their journey from being slaves to free people. The invitation they received, this invitation to leave what they had always known and step into something unknown, must have been pretty nerve-wracking. Have you ever experienced a moment like that? Have you ever had a moment when you were invited to do something you were absolutely scared to do? Maybe you got a job you didn't think you were going to get. Or maybe someone invited you to volunteer to help with something that you had absolutely no idea about. Or maybe you remember going on a first date with your spouse not knowing what to do or where to go. Or maybe it was when you brought your first baby home from the hospital. We've all had these moments when we feel like we're completely out of our league, when we feel like we don't have what it takes. Throughout life, we find ourselves in territories where we've never been. I'd be willing to bet that every single one of us has been asked to step into a role or an opportunity that's scary yet exciting. Last week a friend of mine told me he had the opportunity to adopt 5 kids at one time. Last month another friend of mine told me his job was getting restructured, and so he's no longer in charge of a team of 10 people, he's in charge of a division of 1,000 people. Life's opportunities are in front of you, and the question is, what are you going to do? Are you going to step forward or not? I believe God wants to shape you and me in these moments. I believe God gives us these moments as opportunities for us to experience forward motion. In the Bible, a man named Joshua found himself in several faith-stretching situations. And what I love about Joshua is that he wasn't all that different from you and me. He was a pretty normal guy. But he happened to find himself in some really challenging circumstances. And he let God use those circumstances to grow him. Today, let's see where it all started for him. For Joshua, his story began under the leadership of Moses. Joshua was an Israelite, and he had heard about this promised land that God had set apart for his newly freed people. Joshua had traveled with the Israelites, following Moses out of Egypt and through the desert. So let's pick up the story on the day that everyone had been waiting for, the day they're all about to enter into the promised land. They've arrived on the edge. And the book of Numbers tells us what happens next. The Lord now said to Moses, "Send out men to explore the land of Canaan, the land I am giving to the Israelites. Send one leader from each of the 12 ancestral tribes." So Moses picked 12 guys to do a sort of a recon mission in the land. And Joshua was one of the guys that he picked. It was a huge honor. Moses told the guys, hey, when you go into this new land, there are a few things I want you to look for. See if anyone is already living there. And if so, note how strong they are. Pay attention to the soil, the land, the fruit, the trees. And then come back and let me know what you find. Sounds easy enough, right? But here's a fun fact. Other translations of these verses don't use the word explore. They say spy. This wasn't just some happy little let's go find some figs and make some new friends kind of trip. It was a legitimate spying mission. That sounds like it could be a little worrisome. But off the 12 guys went to spend 40 days spying on the land. And they found good fruit. They found huge grapes, some figs. But they also found huge people, big people. After the 40 days, the 12 spies, they came back to Moses and the rest of the Israelites and gave this report. "We entered the land you sent us to explore, and it is indeed a bountiful country, a land flowing with milk and honey. Here's the kind of fruit it produces. But the people living there are powerful, and their towns are large and fortified. We even saw giants there. We can't go up against them. They are stronger than we are." Did you hear the tone of what the spy said? Could you sense the emotion driving their response? It was fear. They were afraid. How are they going to conquer the powerful people living in the promised land? How would they survive? And so in this huge moment in God's plan for Israel, as they're right on the border of entering the promised land, when they're about to step into the beautiful home that God had set apart for them, this emotion stops them dead in their tracks. Right then, Joshua and the others run into the first obstacle that kept them from going forward. And it's the same obstacle that can keep us from experiencing forward motion: fear. You and I have been there many times, wanting to regress or stop because of fear. It's the same feeling you experience when you submit your resume for a new job. It's the same feeling that makes you think, no one will listen to you in a meeting when you share your idea. Maybe it's the feeling you get when someone at your church invites you on a mission trip or asks you to lead a Bible study. You think, there's no way this is going to happen. There's no point in even trying. It's impossible. And so mentally, or maybe even physically, you shrink back. And that experience is normal and very human. There will always be very logical reasons to step back from where God's trying to lead you. Let's be honest, it isn't our ability that limits our forward motion. Most of us have the ability. It's our fear. Your ability is what God has given you. Fear is what the enemy uses to keep you from tapping into that ability. Fear is the emotion that keeps you from letting your voice be heard or keeps you from sticking your neck out. Fear acts like a slave master telling us what we can and cannot do. But Joshua and his friend Caleb shared a different report. They stared fear down, and this was Joshua's response. The land we traveled through and explored is a wonderful land. And if the Lord is pleased with us, he will bring us safely into that land and give it to us. It is a rich land, flowing with milk and honey. Do not rebel against the Lord, and don't be afraid of the people of the land. They are only helpless prey to us. They have no protection, but the Lord is with us. Don't be afraid of them. Instead of letting fear be a sign to step back, Joshua allowed his fear to be a sign to step forward. Fear can be a sign that you're stepping in the right direction. Now, Joshua still had fear, but he also had courage. Courage is what we have to get where God is leading us. Did Joshua see the giants on the walls? Yes. Was he afraid? Probably so. So why did he give a different report? Here's why. Because of one little phrase, and if the Lord. In the first report, all the other 10 spies talked about were the giants and the walls. But in Joshua and Caleb's report, they remembered God. The other guys, they focused on the obstacles in their report, but Joshua and Caleb focused on God. And that made the difference. It didn't change what was in the land. It changed how they handled their fear. Joshua knew that without God in the picture, the giants would seem too big, and the cities too strong, and the task too impossible. Fear would be in control. But when you factor in God, fear shrinks. Giants seem less giant because God is bigger than giants. Strong walls seem less strong because God is stronger than walls. Impossible obstacles seem possible because nothing can stop God. The broken seems fixable. Failure doesn't seem so scary. Hard work doesn't seem so pointless because God is with you no matter what. Their reality didn't change. The giants were, giants. The cities were established. This was true for the 10 spies who stepped back, and it was true for Joshua and Caleb as well. But because they factored God into their report, they had the courage to move forward. And when it comes to our life, one step of faith is factoring in God when you are afraid. Every time you get close to experiencing forward motion, you will likely run into a giant, some kind of obstacle in life. No one has ever experienced growth, change, or a promised land without slaying a giant or two. At the same time, on the other side of every giant you face is the thing God has been leading you towards. As one of my favorite authors, Susan David, says, discomfort is the price of admission to a meaningful life. On the other side of the giants is destiny. Beyond the fear and lack of confidence, there is a new place. Of all the things that we've talked about through the course of this series, my prayer for you is that you will have an "and if the Lord" moment. Without that, fear is going to win and forward motion will be impossible. For some of us, you've made a mess of life and you're trying to figure out what's next. Because we've all got giants that we're facing. Maybe it's a health problem that seems hopeless, or a marriage that looks bound for disaster, or a financial situation that tells us there's no way out. Some of us have a battle with depression or anxiety that tells us we'll never feel better. Or simply a fear of the future that's so crippling that has us stuck in the same place for years. Some of us feel like forward motion is impossible. We've looked at our situation and come up with a report that says the giants are just too big and the cities are too strong. That's why some of us have given up on our dreams. Some of us had decided to get comfortable in a season or a stage that God only intended to be a part of the journey. Could we find our way forward? What if we began to factor God into the report of our current situation? What if we began to say to ourselves, "and if the Lord"? A giant can always be slayed if the Lord. A mountain can always be moved if the Lord. A new life can always be seized if the Lord. So today, think of one area where fear is calling the shots. It could be your job, your marriage, or your friends, the decisions that you make, your faith, or your home life, whatever it is. But pick an area where you're most tempted to sort of step back right now and decide to factor God into it. Not to get the outcome you want, but to put fear in its place. That's the difference between those who step forward and those who step back. Not that everything goes the way they want, but that they don't let the fear they feel be bigger than the God who is with them. As we do this, we'll have more peace and more confidence, regardless of what happens, because we know God goes with us.